Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Know Your Rights at Work. My name's Brooke and I'm coming from FoodShare Toronto, the community food programs. I'm the manager in that program. Also joining me today, I have my colleague Jade Guthrie, who's the coordinator of community food programs at FoodShare. And we're very, very excited to welcome our co-hosts today from UFCW. We have Natalie Van Gaal, and I'll just read through Natalie's bio here for you. So Natalie is a labour activist who works as a national representative and organiser for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, the UFCW Canada. She's also a food security and food justice advocate. In 2016, she founded the first youth-led food bank in the City of Toronto. Natalie is also a board member for the North York Harvest Food Bank and sits at the Toronto Food Policy Council for the municipal government. So welcome, Natalie. And I'm also very excited to introduce Santiago Escobar. Santiago is a labour organiser, national representative at the UFCW Canada, and coordinator of the Agriculture Workers Alliance, where he advocates for better and safe work environments for agricultural workers. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm going to start today's session with a land acknowledgement, and then the format will be some questions and a bit of context coming from me, and then some answers coming from Natalie and also Santiago. Okay. FoodShare acknowledges that the sacred land in which we operate is situated upon the traditional territories of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands around the Great Lakes. FoodShare recognises that the many nations of Indigenous people who presently live on this land, those who have spent time here, and the ancestors who have hunted and gathered on this land known as Turtle Island. FoodShare recognises and supports the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, applying both to our work. FoodShare also acknowledges the many people of African descent who are not settlers, but whose ancestors were forcibly displaced as part of the transatlantic slave trade, brought against their will and made to work on these lands. We believe that advancing Indigenous sovereignty is deeply and inextricably linked to Black liberation, and we remain committed to advancing both. Okay, so to kick off today's session, the first section we're going to be talking about with Natalie is about ESA and benefits and COVID-19 updates. So my question for you, Natalie, is what are some of the most recent updates regarding COVID-19 workplace rights and benefit programs that workers should keep in mind?
Thank you so much, Brooke, Jade, FoodShare, for hosting us. And absolutely, so we're going to have a super interesting talk today about the ESA, labor rights, and food justice. And yes, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen. So if folks wish to take a picture of some of the information that we're sharing, that'll be great. Or just so they have, they follow up with what I'm talking about in terms of the ESA, because sometimes the language could be a bit confusing. Is everyone able to see my screen okay? Perfect. So when we're talking about the new amendments to the Employment Standards Act, we're basically giving the updates that happened as of December 2020. It is important for folks to know that the COVID-19 period has been extended until July 3rd, 2021. Okay, so we're still technically in the COVID-19 period. Back in 2020, the COVID-19 period was, I believe, up until September. But given the new circumstances, the new variants, the government has extended this period. So keep in mind that when the government refers to the COVID-19 period, it refers to from today and July until July the 30th. During the COVID-19 period, it is important for non-unionized employees to know that if they get their hours reduced or their hours are eliminated for reasons related to COVID-19 purposes, they are deemed to be on a job-protected infectious disease emergency leave. A non-unionized employee is not considered to be laid off or constructively dismissed if their hours were temporarily reduced or eliminated, or their wages were eliminated for reasons of COVID-19. Okay, so for folks who are working right now and their employer, if the employer were to reduce their hours or were to eliminate some of the wages or reduce their wages, and they have to be very clear, it has to be for COVID-19 reasons, then they will be deemed to be on infectious disease emergency leave, okay? As an employee, as a non-union employee, these are some of the rights that you have during this emergency leave. The rights apply to an infectious disease leave. All the same rights that generally apply to an infectious disease emergency leave generally apply to to people, again, whose hours were eliminated or reduced or wages were eliminated due to COVID-19. They have the right to be reinstated, and to be, while on an emergency leave, you shouldn't be penalized for being on an emergency leave. And you have the right to earn credit for length of employment and length of service and seniority as an employee who was deemed an emergency leave. It is very important that, to keep in mind that as a non-union employee, if you are deemed on a leave, the employee must not be represented by a trade union. So for all these conditions, the employee must not be represented by a trade union. The employee is subject to a temporary reduction or elimination in hours or wages. It has to be because of COVID-19. If it's not because of COVID-19, if these reductions of hours or elimination of hours or wages are not related to COVID-19, these conditions do not apply. It is also very important to know that the employer has to initiate the reduction or elimination of employee hours or wages. What does that mean? That as an employee, you cannot choose, or you cannot verbally say, oh, I want my hours reduced, or so on. It has to be initiated by the employer for these conditions to apply. All right, so these are some of the new updates in the legislation when it comes to constructive dismissal, temporary layoff. So what the government has sort of changed for 2021. Now, I also wanted to talk to folks about the right to refuse unsafe work. I mean, we are, after all, we're in a pandemic. There are a lot of misconceptions about what constitutes the right to refuse unsafe work and what doesn't. And so I wanted to make sure that folks understand how to exercise this right and how to utilize it specifically in this tough times. So the right of refusal also applies to all workers in Ontario, regardless of their classification. It's very important for folks to know if you are a contract worker, if you are a part-time, full-time, seasonal, if you are an undocumented worker, this right to refuse unsafe work applies to all workers in Ontario, okay? This right to refusal applies in workplaces where workers suspect that there is an exposition of COVID-19 or any sort of unsafe or unsafe condition of work. But since we're speaking about COVID-19, we're referring it the example of a COVID-19. So if workers at a specific workplace suspect that there is an exposition of COVID-19, they have to keep in mind that the refusal or the suspicion must be based on facts as specific to their workplace and to the specific situation there. So not because if they have a friend in another workplace, if that friend suspected at that workplace, there was an issue of COVID-19 and they were suspected, the situation is very specific to each workplace. So we have to keep it in mind. We cannot use other examples. It has to be addressed from workplace to workplace. If as a worker, you suspect or you're concerned of being exposed to COVID-19 in the workplace and you wish to refuse unsafe work, these are the following steps you must make. The first step is you need to advise your supervisor or the employer ASAP. ASAP. Time matters, okay? You must advise that the work is unsafe and why you're refusing to do it. If there is a health and safety representative at the workplace, please consider advising them as well. Okay? Step number 2. Once you've advised the employer or your supervisor, the employer has an obligation, a legal obligation to investigate the issue in a timely manner. You have the right to be present during investigation or wait in a safe place within the workplace while your employer conducts the investigation. So as a worker, you can be in there during the investigation or be outside. It's your right to make that decision, okay? So after the employer conducts the investigation, and if the employer determines that there is a health and safety issue, then the employer will be legally required to discuss potential solutions specific to COVID-19. For example, providing PPE, working, maybe accommodating the employee to work from home, maybe changing workstations, etc. However, if the employer determines that there isn't a health and safety issue at the workplace, you have the right as a worker to contact the Ministry of Labor and request a formal inspection of the workplace. And consequently, after that, an inspector from the Ministry of Labor will visit the workplace and conduct an investigation. Just like on step 1 and step 2, you have the right to be present during the investigation. You have the full right to be present or to be at a different, in a different space in the workplace where the investigation is conducted. If it is determined that there is a health and safety issue, the inspector from the Ministry of Labor has the authority and order the employer to make all the necessary adjustments to ensure that the workplace is safe, even if that takes that the workplace must be shut down, okay? So if it's determined that there is in fact a health and safety issue going on, the inspector can say, can dictate the employer or has the authority to tell the employer, listen, we need to make all the accommodations to ensure that all the workers are safe. And that takes shutting it down for a couple of days or for a couple of weeks to make sure that the workplace is safe and free of any potential danger. They have the authority. All right, so remember, when we're refusing unsafe work, the first thing is all workers in Ontario, all workers, regardless of their classification, have the right to refuse unsafe work. Be prompt. As a worker, we need to be timely when it comes to refusing unsafe work at the workplace. And keep in mind that the situation is determined depending on each workplace. It cannot be compared with other workplaces. Now, I also wanted to share with folks some of the updates on the income support programs available for individuals as of 2021. There has been a couple of dates that we thought would be important to share. So specifically talking about the income support programs in Ontario as of 2020. For example, folks who are in Ontario Works or receive income support from Ontario Works or the Ontario Disability Support Program, they will continue to receive the regular monthly payments. If someone needs some sort of income support and is not currently receiving Ontario Ontario Works or support from the Ontario Disability Program. It is important for people to know that it is available for up to 48 days at a time. If someone wants to need it as an emergency resource, not as a constant support, but just for a specific period of time, it is available for folks for up to 48 days at a time. It can apply more often. The person can apply for this emergency assistance more often than only 6 months. And low income individuals and families can still apply for this help as of today. So if that is a case, if there is an emergency, if anyone needs to provide or needs to apply for this emergency assistance program, they should definitely apply. Also, there are some other programs and initiatives that the government has promoted. For example, the Low Income Energy Assistance Program, LEAP. So if someone is behind on their bills and they're at risk that their service might be disconnected, they could qualify for $500 to $600 relief for electricity bills and $500 for natural gas bills. Then the other program is CEAP. It's the COVID-19 Energy Assistance Program. So residential consumers who might be overdue or they haven't been able to afford their electricity bill might be able to apply for this specific program. They should contact their electricity and natural gas service provider and see if they can get some relief in their bills. Then the other program is the interest rate and fee caps on paid-in loans. So a lot of people who are at this moment, perhaps they have a loan and a paid-in loan, or they haven't been able to pay for it. It is very important for them to know that as of August 2020, the interest that lenders can charge on paid-in loans in default will be limited to a maximum interest rate of 2.5%. And also, it is very important for them to know that a one-time fee of $25, which is the maximum fee they can charge, might be charged for dishonored or bounced checks or pre-authorized debits. So this way, these loans will be able to relieve some of the stress and the money that they owe. At the federal level, there has been some updates as well. So when it comes to EI, as of September 2020 until September 25 of 2021, the waiting period for EI has been temporarily waived. Individuals will only need 120 insured hours to qualify for EI, as they will receive a one-time credit of 300 insured hours if they're applying for regular benefits, 408 insured hours if they're applying for sickness, maternity, parental care, and given benefits. In general, they should be receiving $500 per week before taxes or $300 per week before taxes for extended parental benefits. It is also important to note that if folks are applying for sickness benefits, they don't need to get a medical certificate. These are some of the updates in the program as of 2021. Then we have the CRB, which also is running from September 27th, 2020 until September 25th, 2021. It provides $1,000 for every 2-week period for up to 26 weeks for workers who have stopped working or had their income reduced by at least 50% due to COVID-19 reasons. So individual must apply for CRB after 2 weeks of income loss. It does not renew automatically, so folks have to renew it. The individual must confirm they've been seeking employment during that 2-week period as well. And individuals can apply even if they're working, but must repay 50 cents for every dollar of net income above $38,000 in 2020 and 2021. These are the new conditions. Then we have the next program, which is the CRCB, the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit, which runs from September 2020 until September 25th, 2021. The CRCB provides $500 per week for up to 26 weeks per household for workers who are unable to work for at least 50% of the week because they must care for a child under the age of 12 or a family member because of school or someone who might be sick at home or a family member who might be sick. And what is important about this benefit for folks to know is that two members of the same household cannot receive CRBC for the same period or week for the same period of week. So if another person in the household is applying, they should not be applying together on the same week. They won't be receiving in the same week. And individuals must apply after each week of leave in which they're providing care. And just like the CRB, it does not renew automatically. And finally, the last benefit I wanted to talk to you about is the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit, which is the CRSB, also running from September 27, 2020 until December 25th, 2021. It provides a $500 per week to a maximum of 2 weeks for workers who A, are unable to work for at least 50% of the week because they contracted COVID-19 or are isolated because of reasons related to COVID-19. The CRSB can be received for a maximum of 2 weeks. No medical certificate is required. The person or the individuals applying must be employed or self-employed before applying and cannot receive paid leave. They cannot receive paid leave from an employer at the same time. From the employer at the same time, and it must apply after the 1 week period of which you're seeking income support. So, important thing to keep in mind is that if the employees are receiving paid leave at the same time, they cannot apply. You can apply to either or. They cannot receive the two benefits, the paid leave benefits and the CRSB. So that concludes the updates in terms of the Employment Standards Act, the right to refuse unsafe work, and the federal and provincial income support programs as of 2021. If anyone has any questions, we'll definitely take them afterwards.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That was such a great breakdown. I mean, I'm glad there's lots of options, but it's quite complicated if you're not well versed in this stuff. So thank you so much for that. For folks viewing this, we will be sending out resources after today's webinar, but also you'll see in the chat box, Jade has posted a bunch of links there that might be of interest to you as well. Okay, so let's move on to our next section here. We're going to be talking about labour organising and unions during COVID-19. So this next question is for Santiago. How have unions and the UFCW Canada supported workers during the pandemic?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, FoodShare, for putting this important workshop together. In the wake of COVID-19, UFCW started to advocate more intensively for the well-being of our members in the food industry and other frontline workers. Thanks to this work, Loblaws, for instance, Loblaws workers were the first to receive a $2 per hour wage increase, known as the Hero Pay. Basically, other frontline workers across the country join and get this benefit. Physical distancing measures were implemented, and plexiglass dividers at checkouts and cashiers counters were also made mandatory. Now is part of the new common of the new normal. So these gains produce discussions in other unionized frontline workplaces such as Metro, Food Basics, Sobeys, Safeways, and other grocery stores across the country. Following these negotiations to protect frontline food workers, also meat plants such as Cargill, Oli Meal, Maple Leaf, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, big corporations, well-known companies. And these workers also achieve additional pay premiums and safety measures at their workplace. This made it possible that non-unionized workplaces also joined the standards set by UFCW, benefited from these measures. Just so you know, UFCW has advocated for over 20 measures to be implemented to protect workers during the pandemic, and especially for frontline and food workers during the COVID-19. For those who want to get to know the 20 measures, can visit ufcw.ca. And also to mention another example, UFCW urged employers to better protect our members, and also federal and provincial governments to reduce or eliminate eligibility to requirements, basically the eligibility requirements for employment insurance and sick benefits. Immediately increase the current EI benefit rate from 55% to 100%. So that was a great achievement to make it easier, to make it, accessible for those in need. And in the case of migrant workers, to pay protection and employment insurance eligibility for all temporary foreign workers who were laid off, have become ill, or have to quarantine due to COVID-19. And also to pay all migrant temporary foreign workers while they are in self-isolation for 14 days. For those who are not familiar with the issue, when temporary foreign workers arrive in Canada, they have to be in quarantine for 14 days. And we, workers and our union were very concerned that, who's going to pay during these 14 days. So the federal government implemented this pay, which is great and is fair. And for the first time, to put it in context, since the implementation of the temporary foreign workers program, we're talking over 50 years ago, these workers now have access for the first time to these programs and protections. UFCW also asked for a $2 wage increase for all frontline migrant farm workers participating in the temporary foreign workers program and in the seasonal agricultural workers program. But unfortunately, this never materialized. So this is something that the province and the federal government is owning to these women and men that are coming from far away to work the land and make possible that we have food and vegetables and fruits of very high quality in our tables. UFCW also insisted that the federal government make available open work permits and pathways to permanent residence for these workers. For those who are not familiar with the issue, temporary foreign workers are tied to one employer, the ones who are working in agriculture. And UFCW also recommended the government to make mandatory that farm workers can join a union as a means to better protect their rights, and for them to be able to exercise their labor rights, human rights, health and safety protections, to have a workplace free of harassment and hazards, have decent housing conditions, and be treated with dignity and respect. That, as you know, and now is COVID has uncovered the crisis within a crisis, so housing is a big issue. Workers are living in overcrowded conditions. Migrant and temporary foreign workers, as you know, are critical to feed in our cities and make possible for us to have food on our tables. So protecting these workers is not only the human thing to do, but is also essential to sustain our food supply, particularly in this time of crisis. This information and more, you can find it at ufcw.ca/AWA. We have produced a report. It's called The Status of Migrant Workers in Canada 2020. Thank you so much. So at the end,
thank you.
if someone has a question, I'm happy to answer any question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Santiago. So huge strides, thanks to the UFCW and other unions that we've seen recently during COVID. So thanks for all your hard work on that. Again, type questions into the chat box if you have any, and we're going to do our best to reach them at the end. My next question is for Natalie. What are some of the advantages of joining a union, and have workers continued to organise during the pandemic?
I love this question. The answer is yes. Thousands of workers have joined the union in the last year. Thousands of workers. I don't know if some of you have had the opportunity to go over the Toronto Star's the news about the Indigo workers joining a union. They were very courageous, just like Indigo workers who decided to organize. Many Indigo locations across the country decided to organize. Thousands of workers joined UFCW Canada last year, and that is representative of how the pandemic has enhanced all the problems, the existing problems at the workplaces, right? When workers join a union, they not only gain the legal right to improve their working conditions, to have a say at the table with the employer to negotiate better and secure conditions of work, but they also gain a voice at work. They gain respect at work. They gain the right to speak freely about the conditions that affect their day-to-day lives at work. So by joining a union, workers only legally speaking, once workers join a union, they have the right to collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is a term that we use in the labor movement to negotiate. They have the legal right to negotiate those conditions with the employer. They gain what we call just cause protection. Are you familiar with the term just cause protection? Okay, so have it explained. So just cause protection, it's one of the legal benefits of joining a union, which means that a worker cannot be fired or disciplined or dismissed without a just cause. So essentially, just cause protection is security, job security, equates to job security. So when all these legal protections come, of course, with having a voice at work, having a union representative visit the workplace to ensure that everything is working in accordance to the collective agreement, which is the union contract that workers and the employer negotiate, and where they negotiate or their improvements in the work security, call it wages, call it benefits, language that protects their vacation, better pay, the establishment of a health and safety committee, health and safety practices, everything that has been negotiated in that collective agreement is enforced by law. In that union contract is enforced by law. And workers who are part of the union are also protected, of course, are protected by this collective agreement. Do you have any questions about workers, unionized workers in particular? Any particular question?
Are you talking to me or are you talking to everybody?
To everyone.
Okay. All right, well, while folks are thinking about what questions they might have, I might move on to the next question for you also, Natalie, if that's okay. How about we talk about some of the misconceptions about organising or bringing a union to the workplace, and what are some of the rights and protections that workers have to join a union in the first place?
Okay, so some of the misconceptions about unions. If I join a union, I'm gonna be fired. It's illegal to join a union. These are some of the misconceptions about unionization. So it is important for all attendees today and for all workers to know that joining a union is a legal process. When workers decide to join unions, or workers who are part of a union, they're protected by this code called the Ontario Labor Relations Act, which is part of the legislation that protects workers who are in the process of joining a union or who are unionized. So if workers decide to join a union, they're protected by this act. So they have the right to confidentially join a union without the interference or coercion of the employer. The right to join a union is confidential. When workers sign union cards, as one of the steps to bring the union to the workplace, those cards are confidential. The employer will never have an opportunity to see who voted or who signed. They will never know who voted yes, who voted no for the union. It's a confidential process. Workers will be protected by the Ontario Labor Relations Act, and the union will have their back and ensure that the workers' rights are protected during the entire process. The employer does not have the right to ask, hey, did you sign a union card? Hey, are you supporter of the union? You have the right to confidentiality. You have the right to join the union securely and safely. And if there's any questions about, some of the misconceptions, the anti-union campaigns and the scary tactics that employer play, don't worry. That's why us organizers exist for. We are going to be there answering all those questions, ensuring that you have all the information so you can make an informed decision with you and your coworkers about bringing the union to a workplace and improving your working conditions through unionization. So yes, there are a lot of misconceptions about unions, but we're happy to talk about them. If you have any more questions about specific misconceptions about scary tactics, happy to talk to you. You can throw that question in the chat. Happy to answer for all of you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you've been there, seen that many times. So that's a great resource to have you. Thank you so much. Okay, so for the next little portion, we're going to refocus the conversation a little bit to talk about food insecurity. And with my eye on the clock, I am going to give a little bit of context, but I am going to give less than I had originally planned. And for folks who are joining this webinar, I'll just send this to you via email later. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Canada then. So according to Statistics Canada, food insecurity is at an all-time high due to COVID-19, with about 1 in 7 Canadians reporting food insecurity. And that was at the start of the pandemic. So that was back in May last year. So they've reported about a 14% rate of food insecurity compared with the 10% who reported food insecurity pre-COVID. So further, rates were higher for Canadian households with children, with nearly 20% reporting being worried about running out of food or maintaining a balanced diet. So the Stats Canada report goes on to say that those who were employed but absent from work due to either business closures, layoffs, or personal circumstances due to COVID-19 were almost 3 times more likely to be food insecure at 28% than those who did work at 10%. Now, those who were actually unemployed at the time of the report expressed a food insecurity rate somewhere in between those two amounts at 16%. So my next question is for Natalie again. So are there any connections between unions and food security?
Thank you so much, Brooke. Thanks so much for the background information. Yes, absolutely. So sometimes when we talk about unions and specifically food unions, we talk about food justice and of course the justice for food workers and the safety and security of food workers. But we also need to think about how unions play a big role in food security as a whole as well. So, for example, here in Toronto, the major reasons why individuals go for a food bank, why they're food insecure, it's because A, most of them have a housing crisis, B, job precarity. So these two are the main factors why folks turn to a food bank to in order to ensure that they can have access to food. So when we talk about food security and job precarity, there's the connection right there about unionization. When we are, when workers are unionized, they have what we just discussed previously, which is just cost protection and job security. Having job security means that you have some level of income security for you and your families to ensure that you'll be able, the fact that you know that you're going to have a job and a steady income coming in will definitely ensure that that at least you will have some sort of security in the future, and you can plan ahead your life, budgeting your life, being in a job that is precarious in nature, that you're sometimes called in or not called out, you're not sure if you're gonna have a job in the next 2-3 months. It's definitely a major factor when it comes to accessing food and being able to purchase food. Absolutely, just like housing crisis, just like housing insecurity, job insecurity definitely plays a huge part. And unionization, when we talk about unionization, besides talking about food justice and food workers justice, we also need to think about it in terms of food security and how these two play a huge role in such.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to move on now to talk a little bit more in depth about Ontario's migrant farm workers. So I'm going to give a small amount of context, and then I have a question for Santiago. Okay, so in Ontario, farm workers are at least 10 times more likely to contract COVID-19 than the overall population. And that was a report from CBC. So just to give a visual here, every year at least 50,000 farm workers travel to Canada, and that number for Ontario is around 20,000 workers, and that's part of the Seasonal Agriculture Worker Program, also known as the SAWP. So this is an annual migration of people, primarily from Mexico and the Caribbean, for up to 8 months at a time to plant, pick and pack around $5 billion worth of produce and provide a labour lifeline for Canadian fruit and vegetable farms. So employers, as part of the deal to get these very skilled migrant workers, they must provide housing and access to necessities such as groceries and healthcare. But what we've seen in recent reports is that living conditions on the farm can be really cramped. Beds can be as close as 1.5 feet apart. Only one toilet and shower are needed for every 10 residents, and spaces are often divided by hanging sheets. There's no pathway to permanent residency status for migrant workers through this particular program, which makes speaking up against unsafe working conditions or racist employers much riskier for the worker. The SAWP program has racist and colonial roots. So plantation dynamics are reproduced in the structures of the program, with mostly Black and brown workers, many of whom are also Indigenous, being driven out of their homelands because of colonial exploitation. Then when they arrive here, workers are tied to a single employer with closed work permits, which is essentially a form of indentured servitude. So Canada really benefits from exploiting this type of labour here on stolen lands. Workers earn minimum wage, which is $14.25 here in Ontario, and they aren't entitled to daily and weekly limits on hours of work, rest periods, time off between shifts, meal breaks, or overtime pay. So farm workers, whether they're Canadians or migrant workers, are not covered by many of the basic labour protections afforded to other workers in Ontario. So in addition to UFCW, there's other volunteer-led organisations that also work alongside migrant workers to support and promote their rights, such as Justicia for Migrant Workers. And so details on that particular organisation will be included in the chat box. And also stay tuned to FoodShare's social media. We'll be hosting another webinar similar to this one with J4MW in March. Okay, so with that context in mind, Santiago, why can't agricultural workers join a union in Ontario?
Thank you, Brooke. I'm going to try to provide a general overview, a short summary of a long legal battle in support of agricultural workers in Canada. So basically, agricultural workers are excluded from the Labor Relations Act. Instead, they are governed by the Agricultural Employees Protection Act and some elements of the Employment Standards Act, which both are weak legislations. Under the Agricultural Employees Protection Act, farm workers don't have the right of collective bargaining. Under this act, farm workers can form an association, but not unions. It asserted that employers have not obligation to negotiate with them, effectively denying agricultural workers the right to collective bargaining. So under the Labor Relations Act, so the employer must negotiate in good faith with the workers. So to put in context, with the Agricultural Employees Protection Act, the employer doesn't have to negotiate with their employees, sorry. Under this act, farm workers can work every day for months without days off, to have an idea of how problematic this so-called Agricultural Employees Protection Act is. We have witnessed migrant farm workers that have been working for 5, 6, even 7 months without no time off. This is happening right now here in Canada, in Ontario. Under the Agricultural Employees Protection Act, workers are not entitled to overtime pay, nor mandatory holidays. Under this act, farm workers can be terminated at any time without a just cause. The Agricultural, Food and Rural Affairs Appeal Tribunal, since 2002, has received only 3 complaints. 3 complaints. All of them filed by UFCW. So this shows that this act, the last thing it will do is protect agricultural workers. This is why agricultural workers haven't used this tribunal since its implementation in 2002. This is very problematic, but we barely hear about it. Back in 1994, following the recommendations of UFCW, as the principal workers representative, which also included agricultural owners organizations, the NDP government enacted the Agricultural Labor Relations Act. To have an idea, to put in context this whole mess. This act granted collective bargaining rights to agricultural workers in Ontario for the first time in history. In 1995, UFCW certified to represent around 200 workers at Highline Mushrooms, which is a mushroom factory in Leamington that runs the whole year, almost 24/7, which continues operating until today. And the government, I would like to add that the federal government implemented a new program. It's called Open Work Permits for vulnerable workers because they're tied to one employer. And we have assisted many temporary foreign workers experiencing abuses from this particular operation as they were experiencing abuses. So this became the only bargaining unit certified under the Agricultural Labor Relations Act. To put in context that some workers took a stand, organized themselves, and joined UFCW. However, the Mike Harris progressive conservative government repealed the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, denying workers at Highline farms and elsewhere the chance to bargain for collective agreement. This was the beginning of a long legal battle led by UFCW before Ontario courts and the Supreme Court of Canada. After years of legal battle, in 2011, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled against agricultural workers by restricting the right of form a union and have the right to collective bargaining. Many experts have said that this ruling violated the freedom of association under the Charters of Rights and Freedoms. And to have an idea, in 2010, the International Labor Organization found Canada and Ontario guilty of discriminatory attack on the human and labor rights of farm workers in the province. In the same year, the International Labor Organization upheld the complaint filed by UFCW. So the decision was forwarded to the Supreme Court of Canada to add to other evidence and submissions in front of it. In conclusion, agricultural workers in Ontario are powerless, voiceless. So as long as these workers are excluded from the Labor Relations Act, it is very unlikely that their labor rights and health and safety protections will be improved. This is a sad reality. In the case of migrant farm workers, they are even more precarious as they don't have labor mobility. They're tied to one employer. If they're experiencing abuses, if they leave the bad employer, they can be sent back home. So it's a very problematic immigration status. UFCW has lobbied the federal government, so these workers, should be able to have open work permits, the right to join a union as a meaningful protection and solution. Like I said before, only a collective agreement, which is a binding document, is the only mechanism for these workers to be able to have meaningful protections. Like I said before, and Natalie was addressing as well, the pandemic has uncovered, a crisis within a crisis. This is why we are demanding it's time for agricultural workers to have a voice. Local and migrant workers deserve to be treated with dignity and respect at work, no matter where they come from or their status. That was my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you know what, I think you've actually inversely answered my next question, but I'll ask it anyway, just in case you wanted to give one or two take-home message points, Santiago. How would a union help in protecting farm workers? I do think you answered that beautifully, but just in case you had anything extra you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think it's important. If agricultural workers have the right to collective bargaining, first of all, they would have a voice. They would be entitled to overtime pay, scheduling, to give them mandatory time off. They will be able to negotiate better wages and even pay sick days. Just to have an idea, in our collective agreements, we have on average 10 pay sick days per year. We have learned that migrant farm workers often work even when they're sick, even when they have contracted COVID, as they cannot afford to lose income, as they won't be able to support their families back home. So unionized workers have strong protections against harassment or any kind of oppression or racism, and a strong health and safety protections. I think I would like to emphasize that unionized workers, UFCW workers, have what is called a co-joint health and safety committee, where workers can coordinate with their employers and have a more active role in keeping the workplace safe, especially now to implement measures to protect farm workers against COVID-19. If measures had been implemented sooner, if migrant farm workers had been provided with PPE or had been allowed to practice physical distancing, the situation would be totally different. Already, unfortunately, 3 migrant farm workers died due to COVID in the province of Ontario. I'll give you another example. Right now, farm workers and local and migrant farm workers have to buy their own mask, which is totally unacceptable. You would think that during COVID they would get, what is common sense, but in their case, it's the opposite. So, by the way, in 2006, thanks to UFCW advocacy work, health and safety coverage was granted to Ontario farm workers. For the first time, in the Act's history, occupational health and safety was extended to cover agricultural workers and the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act. So can you imagine just, back in 2006? And, Natalie already mentioned that unionized workers have just cause protection. This is the most powerful protection against employers' harassment, and workers cannot be disciplined or terminated without just cause. Unionized workers, if they feel unsafe, they have the right to refuse to work without having to worry of losing their jobs. These could potentially help farm workers to avoid a high level of exposure to COVID-19, because right now workers living in overcrowded conditions, they don't get PPE. If they come forward, if they complain, they can be sent back home. So unionized workers, won't have those issues. They will have a legal grievance procedure if health and safety concerns are not met at the workplace. They have the right to file a formal written grievance, and the union has to step in to help. And also, I would like to mention that, as a best practice, that the federal government and provincial governments can, look at this successful experience. In Alberta and Manitoba, over 5,000 temporary foreign workers working at meat plants, unionized meat plants with UFCW, they were able to obtain permanent residence as UFCW negotiated with the employer. So the employer have to sponsor these workers under the provincial nominee program. The union assisted these workers with ESL classes and with filing the documentation before the federal government. And this is, something that the federal government and the Ontario provincial government have in their hands. It's just political will. These are some of the protections, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for that. And that's a huge win in Alberta, so congratulations. So we do have a couple of questions here. I know it is almost right at 12, so for those folks that need to jump right at 12 noon, thank you so much for joining us. We will continue on with a couple of questions, if that's okay with you, Natalie and Santiago, just to stay on for a couple more minutes. But just a reminder, this is recorded, so if you do need to jump, you can always watch the rest of this later. Okay, so we have a question from Tara. What protections do non-unionized workers have against being fired without just cause?
So it's very interesting that that this question is asked, because when it comes to non-unionized workplaces, we talk about a lot of precarity, as we were talking initially, right? An employer, if a non-unionized employee is fired, the employer does not have to provide a just cause reason to let that person go. By law, under the Employment Standards Act, the employer has no obligation whatsoever to provide an explanation, as long as the employer provides notice of termination or pay in lieu of notice of termination. Now, the case is different if there is suspicion that there is grounds for human rights discrimination when the person is terminated. That will fall under, discrimination in human rights in the Human Rights Tribunal. But when it comes to actual providing an actual factual reason for letting an employee go, the employer does not need to provide a cause, as long as they provide, as I mentioned before, notice of termination or pay in lieu of the notice of termination.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we do have a question as well from Dave. Can you talk about some of the typical tactics employers use to disparage a union during a union organizing campaign?
Santiago, you and I could stay here for hours talking about anti-union campaigns. We could talk, listen, I'm going to share some. Santiago, if you want to share some as well, that'd be great. Listen, I've seen them cry. I've seen them cry. People, I've seen employers. I'm not even kidding. Sniffing, crying. We are a family. If you folks join the union, we will close down. If you join the union, you won't be able to talk to us the same way you've talked to us in the past. The union will divide you. You're going to pay union dues. That's a lot of money. You will not be able to interact the same way as before. The employer cannot afford the union. We've seen pizza parties. We've seen ice creams and cakes. We've seen letters, handwritten letters to each employee, giving the reasons to not join a union. Santiago, do you want to do the honors? Continue.
No, you covered it all.
Wow. Was there something written on the cake, just out of curiosity? Like, do not join?
Oh. Unfortunately, no. But I mean, the cake itself was pretty obvious. But I could answer to some of these scary tactics and how some of the answers for the scary tactics. Listen, the first one is, these are just ways that the employer plays with people's feelings. When talking about family, when they're talking about the division, these are powers of division, politics of division of the workplace. When you have a union, you can communicate with your employer the same way you've always done it. The only difference is that you have a collective bargaining agreement, a union contract, and you know that you have some rights, a lot of rights in there, and they're enforceable by law. So if the employer does not fulfill it, you have the legal right, just like Santiago said, to file a grievance against the employer, which is a name for a legal complaint against the employer for not following through with the collective agreement. You can talk to your supervisors and managers the same way you've always done. There's not such a thing as once the union is in, the relationship is going to change. In my opinion, it changed for the better. When you know what your rights are and you know what your protections are, I think relationships get better. There's no gray areas. There's no room for unfair treatment or unfair practices to happen. So in my opinion, they do get better.
Yeah, we have seen, just to add, and we have seen that, employers, they hold the whole power, right? And is that power, unfair power relationship dynamic. So with a union, basically you will be in a better position. So we'll have a voice. And we have seen that employers don't like that workers have a voice, have a say. So this is why it's so important to be a member of a union.
Right. Thank you so much, Santiago and Natalie, for all of your wisdom and everything you brought to today's discussion, because it is quite complicated and it is a lot of information. And to take your words, Santiago, this whole mess when it comes to migrant workers and what needs to be done moving forward. And so in the absence of any more questions, I'll wrap up today's session. Thank you everyone who joined us. And yeah, we look forward to continuing the discussion further. So thanks again.